Hello, I'm SB Moores, and today I wanted to make a video about an epigraph that appears in Toll the Hounds, the seventh or eighth novel in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. This will be full spoilers up until the end of Toll the Hounds, so it'll just be full spoilers for Toll the Hounds and previous books. Nothing will go into Dust of Dreams or anything beyond that. So if you've only read up to Toll the Hounds, you're good to watch this. Um, but in specific, I was looking at some of the epigraphs of some of the chapters, and I couldn't find one that I specifically recalled. Um, I, it took me a while to find it because it's so early on in the book, and I thought it was way later. I kept flipping through the last like 400, last half of the book, and I was like, "Where is it?" But no, it's right there at the beginning. Um, using this old flimsy piece of paper as a bookmark because all my bookmarks are taken up right now. But it is the epigraph of chapter 3, which is one of the Darajistan chapters, and it is simply entitled Fisher's Challenge to His Listeners, Breaking the Telling of the Mane of Chaos. And I just wanted to do a quick little analysis, quick little my thoughts on it, some things that I really thought about after reading it a little more closely. And one of the reasons I think it needs, or the reasons that I read it more closely anyway, is it's very odd for a Fisher Kaltath epigraph because usually when you read an epigraph that was written by Fisher Kaltath or Fisher or poems that are seemingly attributed to him, it's usually just a poem he's written and it's not taken as him actually doing a rendition of it, but more of just what he actually wrote and put out into the world. Like Anamandaris, even though he has sung that. Um, but it's a lot different in this book because the whole framing for Toll the Hounds is, of course, Krupe, as I'm going to continue calling him till the end of time, regales the tale of this book to Fisher Kaltath and Karul, which is kind of funny because Fisher Kaltath is actually a character in this. He appears in the story itself. So he's kind of being told some information that he already knows because he firsthand witnessed it. And either Krupe somehow knows or Fisher Kaltath filled in some blanks uh, for him there. But regardless, we actually see that he actually performs his songs as any good bard would in Karul's bar. But what's so telling about, or so interesting about that specific one, is not only is it him actually uh, doing a reading of the Mane of Chaos, which I think this is the only bit of it we ever see. I'm assuming it's much longer considering it's considered a telling. So I would imagine that's a little bit longer than your average several stanza, couple verse poem. Um, what's so interesting is that it is fragment of it broken up by Fisher Kaltath going off script and slinging some slam poetry at his listeners. But in all seriousness, he comes up with a couple of it's written as lines of a poem, but I don't know if it was meant to be taken as him just speaking aloud, but based off of him being a bard and the way that it was transcribed, I'm assuming that he started singing these just as he would the Mane of Chaos. He just broke it up with his own uh, candid, on the spot things that he wanted to say, and we don't actually get an explanation for why he did this. It could have been a spur of the moment thing, or it could have been because of something the crowd or the listeners were doing, or something else that was on his mind, or we don't know. Which is part of the interest of it, I believe. But without further ado, I'll do a quick little reading of it. Both of the first part, which is the Mane of Chaos, and then the part that he interrupts, and I'll let you know when that happens, although, because it might not be immediately obvious, but yeah. It's kind of long, so this might take, but. And he knew to stand there would be a task unforgiving. Relentless as sacrifices made and blood vows given, he knew enough to wait alone before the charge of fury's heat, the chance of vengeance, where swords will meet, And where once were mortals, still remain dreams of home, if but one gilded door could be pried open. Did he waste breath in bargain, or turn aside on the moment? Did he smile in pleasure, seeking chastisement? This next bit is where he begins his interruption, or his challenge to his listeners. See him still, he stands there, while you remain unforgiving. The poet damns you, the artist cries out. The one who weeps turns his face away. Your mind is crowded by the inconsequential, listing the details of the minuscule and every measure of what means nothing to anyone. He takes from you every rage, every crime, whether you like it or you do not. Sacrifices made, vows given. He stands alone because none of you dare stand with him. And then it just says Fisher's challenge to his listeners, breaking the telling of the Mane of Chaos. So I'll first go over why I sort of read it, even though the rest of the video will also explain that, but I'll give a quick preliminary why I had that sort of cadence. For the Mane of Chaos part, I read it that way, purely based off of the vibe that little section of the Mane of Chaos gives. It's very almost, as a lot of Fisher Keltath poems are to me, kind of somber, especially with the way certain aspects of the poem. Um, there are there are very few punctuation marks, although there is the occasional period. So I did stop a little bit when periods happen, and then line breaks. I would stop for what I felt was the appropriate amount of time based off of what I thought made sense. But I could have been completely off from Fisher Keltath or Stephen Erickson, how he envisioned it when he originally wrote it. But then afterward, when I got to the challenge part, I got a little more. I don't know if visceral is the word, but this is my first time actually reading it aloud, but this is the inner voice that I've had while reading it before. And I had that sort of more aggressive tone because to me, a challenge in the middle of a song sort of denotes this almost confrontational um, aspect to it. Or even if it's not quite confrontational, it's supposed to be, the word came to my mind, bombastic. I don't think that fits it at all. It's more, he really wants you to think or to understand certain things. And so I feel like he would take that more aggressive tone for that reason, especially with some of the things he says. Now, his interruption actually was two stanzas, and in the second stanza there were two lines where it ends in dot dot dot. So I'm assuming that Fisher Keltath paused, like he took an actual pause. So that's part of why I read it that way. But as you'll probably notice from the title of this video, it's not just titled Fisher Keltath's challenge to his listeners, breaking his telling of the Mane of Chaos, analysis, discussion, whatever. It says something about Fisher Keltath and Animander Rake in the title, and the Mane of Chaos, because all of these things relate very heavily to each other. I don't know if you realize, but the Mane of Chaos is another title for Animander Rake, heaped on top of the however many titles that Animander Rake has. It's really unlimited how many titles he has. Son of Darkness, Animandaris Purake, Animander Dragnapurake. Even though that's his sword, I've heard people use that as his last name in Toll the Hounds. But this isn't something that I feel needs to go line by line, but there are a few key lines that I think make a lot of sense to talk about. But I think the first thing that I'll go into is the Mane of Chaos. So the poem being titled that he was telling automatically tells you it's about Animander Rake. It's not part of Animandaris as far as this little bit leads me to believe. I think I went on the wiki page and it didn't say it was like an excerpt of it. Plus, whenever there is an excerpt of Animandaris, it's actually, or a verse, it's actually written as like part of Animandaris in whatever book of it is. Little interesting thing. I also read this on the wiki. Stephen Erickson had a passing interest in actually writing down the entirety of Animandaris, but seeing as how poetry's not really that popular, he decided to scrap it, and he also said that it would be as long as an actual Malazan book. Me personally, I really hope that happens. I would love to read the entirety of Animandaris. I'm not quite that versed in poetry, even though I really enjoy reading Stephen Erickson's for the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but being able to read the epic that is Animandaris would absolutely be a dream come true in its entirety. It would be a dream come true. But as far as we're aware, it's actually still being written by the end of Toll the Hounds. Like he's composing new verses during this book. So take that as you will. Maybe it's a tale that never ends, but maybe it does because if you've read Toll the Hounds, you know. And I would hope you've read it because already there's going to be spoilers. Um, but with the Mane of Chaos in specific as a poem, the way that it starts out and then it ends, I feel, is most important for establishing tone as well as establishing what at least that part of the poem is. Starting out with, and he knew to stand there would be a task unforgiving, relentless as sacrifices made and blood vows given. He knew to wait alone before the charge of fury's heat. And then there's a lot more before the next period, so I'm not going to read all that. But just that beginning bit really, I think that it tells you what the Mane of Chaos is really about, especially since it has chaos in the title. It's really about this is kind of acknowledging and talking about Animander Rake having Dragniper in his possession. Because as it's shown throughout the series, Dragniper is not just a tool or a weapon. It's not just a weapon, it is a burden on the user. And beyond just the mental weight and the amount of pressure it puts on Animander to have this powerful sword, to be the one who wields it, it kind of also to me puts a target on his back because um I remember hearing in either um a YouTube video that was a semi interview or just discussion with Steven Erickson by either AP Canavan, who's a critical dragon on YouTube, great channel by the way, or uh, Professor Philip Chase, also a great YouTuber. Both their channels are amazing. Um, but in a video where I forget who it was, but one of them or maybe both of them were talking to Steven Erickson, and he mentions I think Ian Sieselman might have been there too. They mention that Osirk had numerous times in the past tried to steal Dragnarberg. And obviously in this book we find out that Apsalara, or Apsalar, the Lady of Thieves, or the Mistress of Thieves, she also attempted to steal the sword, which is how she died. And it's presumed that a lot of other people have done this. So that's a burden that's not really talked about as much because I believe that that is a burden of Dragnarber that isn't as put to the forefront or really as important per se, even though it still is definitely. I mean, I don't think as powerful as Animander is, it's definitely not nice having a ton of people always on your back because they want to steal your sword that can imprison you for forever. Uh, but it also goes back to the original struggles of Animander holding Dragnifer and why it's a burden. Because when he kills people with the sword, he knows what he's damning them to. It is not essentially torture, it is torture, and it's eternal. Up until the end of this book. But up until that point, Dragnifer is essentially hell. It really is just hell. And knowing what happens to people when he kills them with it, it brings Animander no joy. And that's part of the burden is that he really doesn't want to use this sword. No one would want to use this sword except for maybe nefarious people. Iskral Puss might have wanted the sword. I honestly think that would have been a better ending to Toll the Hounds if Iskral Puss got Dragnifer and went, just started doing his own adventures. Not Malazan Book of the Fallen, Iskral Puss Book of the Fallen. The amount of people that he would have killed. Krupe and his mule were first. And then maybe Magora, so he could have gotten with Sword Ko Kwam. Um, but in actuality, not being flippant or I can't think of the other word, facetious, without being facetious. It really is a burden for Animander to have to use this sword because if he's not there's that initial burden that the sword needs souls. You can't not use Dragnipper, and I mean that's like one of the big issues that's riding throughout the series in the Ganabakis plot lines and even in the other plot lines. I don't know the exact how the reading went, but I do remember they mentioned the realm of chains within the sword at some point during Midnight Tides, which obviously has nothing correlating it. I mean, there's a lot correlating it, but it has nothing to do with the events on Ganabakis at that point. But then Featherwitch does her reading, and it mentions the sword because the sword's super powerful and it's very important to the mythos of the Malazan world as well as what's currently happening in the world, especially by the end of Toll the Hounds. I don't think it would be. I would be remiss in saying that the final lines of Lady Envy and Fisher Keltath talking and her saying, "My father, he's back," and we knew that he was in Dragonfur. I think that that's pretty telling of something important that might happen. That might be crazy foreshadowing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to hammer home that idea that using this sword and having it and making sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands is no easy task. And I don't think it's directly stated, but I would just assume that the Mane of Chaos was written as well by Fisher Keltath, considering apparently he knows more about Animander than any other person alive. But what is so interesting about it is it really tells you what Animander, or not Animander, Fisher Keltath thinks of Animander Wraith. This sort of attitude that he has towards him, and it's one of great respect, born out of his understanding of the sacrifice that Animander makes in wielding this sword, because he needs to kill people with it. Um, Otherwise, chaos will overtake the Warren. And to my understanding, if it overtakes the Warren in Dragnipper, it also destroys the last gate leading to Corald Galen, meaning it will also devour Corald Galen, the Elder Warren of Darkness, which would be terrible because then the Teist Andy really would have no hope. I mean, throughout the series, it's already kind of hammered into us that the Teist Andy are an extremely melancholic, alien race that have very little going on for them except following Animander. And even then, Animander basically just tries to make them do what he thinks is just to help people, but it's not really a fulfilling life for the people of um for the Tystandi. And I think this is going a little bit into the book itself. That is really shown at the beginning of this book when the Tystandi's biggest problem, Endicillon, who's this, you know, hundreds of 100,000+ year old high priest of the Elder One of Darkness of Mother Dark, who can use insane magic, who's done insane things, and his biggest concern is finding a new eel supplier for Black Coral. Way to really put a man below the station he deserves. I mean, if you want to call it that. I mean, I feel like this is the equivalent of if you had who's a super famous athlete that I could use that would everybody would know. This is like if a professional hockey player was playing in Little League hockey. That's what it feels like for Endicillon. Not to say that finding a new eel supplier for Black Coral isn't a worthy endeavor, but it's not at all, in my opinion. I mean, it really doesn't speak to what the Tystandi are, this race of old who have lived through countless eons, essentially, and they're just back to doing the petty squabbles of life. I mean, they've been doing this for 100,000 years. I think anybody would get tired of it at that point. Tystandi are literally without purpose. Their purpose is to go back to Corald Galen and for Mother Dark to return to them, and they just haven't. And for Fisher Keltath to have this attitude towards Animander also speaks very heavily about Animander. And I've talked about this in my previous video where I sort of discuss my entire thoughts about Animander Rake. And I mean, it wasn't only about Animander Rake, but I did talk about him quite a bit towards the end. And that is that Animander Rake is a character who's you learn more about through other people than by watching him himself. Animander is a character who is told he's a main character told from the perspective of other people. And what's so interesting and telling about this is that while we can obviously see the deeds of Animander and judge for ourselves the kind of man that he is, to see other people and get to know them well, and then presumably have respect and caring for them, and then to see how much of themselves they would give and how highly they think of Animander really shows you the caliber of person that he is. Um, Me personally, I think Steven Erikson did a phenomenal job of telling Animander from other people's perspectives, of building up a character from secondhand accounts and firsthand accounts every now and again. But really, Animander is a character that is built into the minds of everybody else, and that collective consciousness of who he is builds him versus us going into Animander himself. Obviously, it happens from time to time. I remember a really badass, excuse the French, scene in Gardens of the Moon where we get Animander's perspective of him as a dragon in the sky, falling down into Dargistan onto Pearl. Epic scene. But I mean, doesn't really give you a lot of Animander. It just shows you how absolutely cool he is. Um, but that's essentially what I gathered off of Mane of Chaos, is that Fisher Keltath almost has this irreverent, or I don't know if irreverent is the word. I might be using the antonym of what I'm thinking of, or the negation of what I'm thinking of. He reveres Animander almost with such decorum and respect that it builds on what Endis Silon and Spinok Durav do throughout this book and what other characters do for Animander as a character. Um, Going further now, or let's speak a little bit on the ending of his excerpt of the telling of the Mane of Chaos. He then says, he kind of asks rhetorically, which really, reinforces his home. Did he waste breath in bargain or turn aside on the moment? Did he smile in pleasure, seeking chastisement? The way that I read this and interpreted it really is, did he waste breath in bargain? Did he? It almost feels as if he's scoffing at the listener, saying, could you even imagine Animander wasting his breath for this bargain? Would he even second guess himself? Animander is not that kind of man, it seems. And that's kind of the attitude that he gives that really reinforces who Animander is. And I would consider Fisher Keltath a reliable source, even if he never directly interacts with Animander as far as we're aware. I don't really know how he knows all of this, but it's interesting. Um, but then during his breaking of the telling of the Mane of Chaos, he starts going off on these other verses, and it almost feels as if it could blend perfectly into it because it's really giving that contemptuous attitude he has for the listener and continuing it. Where he goes, see him still, he stands there while you remain unforgiving. The poet damns you, the artist cries out. The one who weeps turns his face away, almost as if he is the man who weeps, Fisher Keltath, because he just is so distraught by the idea Animander has done all of this and these people cannot fathom it. Or at the very least, they don't give it proper respect and decorum, as he believes he does. Your mind is crowded by the inconsequential, listing the details of the minuscule and every measure of what means nothing to anyone. As if this, to me, kind of speaks to an attitude that I feel a lot of other people in real life might have towards Animander Rake. And it's kind of an attitude that goes through fantasy as a genre as a whole. Um, and that is not to say that what I'm about to say or what I believe some people are like when they read is bad by any means. But I believe that there's also a very big attitude of people that look at Animander Rake and all they think is, wow, this guy is so cool. He's so powerful. He has this awesome burden. He's just so cool. And they don't really look at the kind of man Animander is beyond that. They're looking at sort of the archetypal badass, super OP, crazy, powerful, legendary, artifact wielding, godlike entity that can do what he wants because he's so cool and he chooses the right battle and he does the just thing. Even though that's not who Animander is wholly. You could definitely argue that that is a little bit of who Animander is, and I wouldn't chastise you at all, as Animander does not await. But I feel like that's what Fisher is really pushing against. You're measuring the details that don't really matter of Animander. You're thinking about all this legendary stuff he does, but you're not thinking about who the man Animander is. He's a man that is so much more than actions you've seen. And they're more than the actions I even tell you. And even when I try and tell you, you do not listen. That's almost what it feels like. That's why it's a challenge to his listeners that ends with he takes from you every rage, every crime. Almost like Fisher might be crying. He might be that crying poet. The poet damns you. The artist, oh, I'm sorry, the artist cries out. He takes from you every rage, every crime, whether you like it or you do not. Sacrifices made, vows given. He stands alone because none of you dare stand with him. That is his ultimate challenge. None of you dare to stand with Animander. You do not think to be as Animander is. You couldn't even fathom what Animander is like. All right, maybe I am being a little too into Animander being this awesome figure that's so maybe I'm putting him too much on a pedestal, but which is ironic because I feel as if this almost is trying to humanize Animander a little more and show you the kind of even though he is such a great man, he is still a man. And Fisher's challenge is to really think about who Animander is to be this great man, and he's asking his listeners to try and be the great man that Animander is, but you cannot. Now, to be fair, Animander probably has a little bit of a head start since it seems as if he was royalty in Carcanos. I'm not still quite sure on that, but I'm pretty sure. He does have quite an epic sword. Not everybody's wandering into the forest and coming across Dragnipur or Excalibur or a sword called Grief or a sword called Vengeance. We're not all stumbling upon those, but it's really his challenge to the audience is to be the kind of man that Animander is, or to try to be as good of a man as Animander is, because that's ultimately what Fisher Keltath thinks of him is that he is just a great and good man. He makes these sacrifices that nobody else would be willing to make. He has such a powerful sword and he chooses to do as much good with it as possible. And then even in the end of this book, which is really where we get the most of Animander himself, he's remorseful for everything. Everything is just remorseful about Animander. And that's almost kind of part of that challenge is to be as remorseful as Animander is about the wrongs that you do, even if you do them for just things. And to me, that's really what this breaking of the telling of the Mane of Chaos was. And it's why I find Animander, Fisher Keltath, and this specific epigraph so interesting. Because it's very telling of certain attitudes that Fisher Keltath has towards Animander as well as towards his audience. But it also further hits home those points about Animander himself. Now you'll notice that I didn't actually talk about the chapter it precedes, which is strange because usually the epigraphs have a lot to do with the chapter they precede. I couldn't tell you if this has anything to do with that chapter. I skimmed through it to remember what happened, and no parallels jumped to my mind. No immediate connections were made. And even thinking about it a little more from that, I can't really uh, think upon it anymore. I don't think it has really any correlation. He just wanted to drive home some themes about Animander as early as he could, and he just chose this chapter. Um, Not to say that that's bad. I think this was an amazing epigraph, and I'm glad it came before this chapter. The only thing I could really think of is that this chapter is where it seems events really start sort of moving along. They're starting to chug, and as that happens, we're starting to get that build up towards Animander, which definitely continues with the Black Coral and Lamatath Plains and all the wider Ganabakis plot lines that happen throughout this book. But that was just some thoughts, analysis, kind of a discussion with myself and you viewers, if you're so kind as to comment, about Fisher Kaltath's breaking of the telling and challenge to his readers of the Mane of Chaos. I just butchered that. I said that like that was spaghetti talk. Um, but those were just my thoughts on it. If you have any comments, I'll gladly respond to them because I'd love to talk about this. If you have any of your own thoughts about this, and I hope that my video made you think a little more about Animander and about Fisher Keltath and this specific epigraph because it's definitely worth a closer reading if you're willing to. I didn't go line by line, so it might be it might be an enriching experience for you yourself to go back and to read it line by line. And maybe you can make some connections or formulate some thoughts that I couldn't have made because I didn't go through line by line. I mean, I read the entire poem, but there were a few key elements of a few key lines that I picked out that really spoke to me. There was that whole line about a gilded door frame, and I didn't even touch on that. So I highly implore you to go back. These books are so good at really hooking you in with how cool the action and everything is. But then when you really think about some of the ideas presented of certain characters and the ideas that they represent, like Animander and his self-sacrifice and the kindness and compassion and the sorrow, and the kind of man he is, that it really bleeds through how awesome. I don't even know what other word to use. How awesome the Malazan Book of the Fallen series is, and how awesome Steven Erickson's writing is. But enough of um me just talking about how cool Animander is and how cool Fisher Keltath and this series is. One final little note. I'm going to go back and change. I'm going to start color coding my thumbnails so that it will be uh, one so that my when you if anybody ever does visit my channel, it's not just a wall of red text. Uh, but maybe it's a little OCD like, even though I don't have OCD. I figured it would be nice if every time I made a Toll the Hounds video, the thumbnail had green text, and then every time I make a Dust of Dreams video, it has purple text and whatever colors I felt fit that book for whatever reason. I mean, you could probably guess why I think Toll the Hounds is green, but without further that is all. So I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope that you have a great day.